In Act 3, Scene 5 of Romeo and Juliet, Juliet describes the singing of a lark outside of her window. She says to Romeo, "Some say the lark makes sweet division. This doth not so, for she divideth us." In this moment, Juliet is playing on two different senses of the word divide. We modern readers can understand pretty clearly the idea that the lark divides Juliet from Romeo. The lark song means it's daylight, which means Romeo has to get himself out of Verona immediately. But there's another sense of the word in the phrase, "the lark makes sweet division." Division in this context is a musical term. In Shakespeare's time, it referred to a specific way of ornamenting or improvising on a melody. And I'm going to demonstrate for you what that sounded like using a recorder, a woodwind instrument that was very popular in Shakespeare's day. Probably recognize it. So as you might guess, division works by dividing up musical intervals. So imagine that you're singing or playing a melody which has a big interval between notes, like a fifth. Now, as you repeat that melody, you want to add some variations, change it up, make it more interesting. And Renaissance musicians would do a lot of improvisation of these kinds of variations and melodic decorations, not unlike what jazz musicians do today. So one way to ornament this interval with divisions is to divide up the notes so there are smaller intervals. So we go from this to this, or. So that's how you might divide up the pitches. You can also divide up the time by articulating multiple shorter notes in place of long-held notes. So instead of this, you might have something else. And you can apply those techniques to a whole melody. So the melody I'm going to use as my example is one that's actually mentioned in Romeo and Juliet. It's called Heart's Ease. This is the song that Peter requests from the musicians in Act 4, Scene 5, and it goes like this. Now here's what it might sound like with divisions added. I've also thrown in a couple of other kinds of ornamentations. For example, a trill, which is pretty appropriate since we're talking about bird song, but mostly divisions. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what Juliet means when she says the lark makes sweet division, that the lark is improvising and ornamenting a melody just the way a skillful human musician would.